Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game. And believe it or not, it's already time for part 11 of my Journey to Unguro card review. This time around, I have 3 new cards to take a look at, including some new Adapt cards, some Elemental Synergy cards, and even a Death Rattle Synergy card for Hunter. So let's go ahead and jump into these and see what they're all about. Starting off with the Lightfused Stegodon, a new 4-mana Paladin minion. This is a 3/4 beast with the battle cry, Adapt your Silver Hand Recruits. So first things first, 3/4 is not an ideal stat allocation for 4 mana. That's obviously a little bit understated. So you have to hope here that the battle cry makes up for that fact. Some past 4 mana 3/4s we've seen for Paladin are the Keeper of Uldaman, which had an incredibly strong battle cry that could also buff your Silver Hand Recruits from a 1/1 to a 3/3, but of course also had the flexibility to serve as sort of a soft removal for big minions on your opponent's side of the board, setting up trades or clears of some sort, because you negate those stats from an 8/8 to a 3/3. So this is kind of similar as far as the cost, the stat allocation, and the battle cry are concerned, but of course this only affects your own side of the board, and Adapt, on average, I would say is probably worth about 1 mana for most of the effects, if you think about just efficiency of the effect. So arguably, if this hits 1 minion, this is about a neutral efficiency minion. If it hits 1 Silver Hand Recruit, if you just adapt once, I'm trying to say, let me get this out. So that would make this roughly a 4 mana card. But as you start to adapt more Silver Hand Recruits, say you adapt 2 or 3, you can see how this becomes more and more efficient and more powerful. So the conditional aspect of Lightfused Stegodon means you pretty much have to have a couple Silver Hand Recruits active for this card to make a lot of sense. Because even if you just adapt 1, I'm not sure this is a strong enough card. You could turn it into a 3/1 Silver Hand Recruit, but a 4/1 Silver Hand Recruit if you gave it +3 attack, or a 1/4 Silver Hand Recruit, or a 2/2 Silver Hand Recruit. But you can see how that's considerably worse already than the Keeper of Uldaman. A +1/+1 is way worse than turning it into a 3/3. Plus, this card lacks tons of flexibility. So you really have to have at least 2 Silver Hand Recruits, I think, for this to make a ton of sense. And I don't know how often that happens, right? Like, Silver Hand Recruits are sort of just fodder for the board. Opponents usually spend time cleaning them. They're clearing them up. They're susceptible to area of effect removal. There's not often that you have a ton of Silver Hand Recruits out there. And a 6 mana play of hero power into Lightfused Stegodon is really underwhelming. Even with the best results, that's kind of like an Argent Squire and a 3/4 for 6 mana, which is pretty bad. Now, there was a new card revealed recently for Journey to Unguro called Lost in the Jungle. That was a 1 mana spell that summoned 2 Silver Hand Recruits. That certainly helps increase the efficiency of the Lightfused Stegodon. Suddenly you have a 5 mana play that summon a 3/4 and 2 Argent Squires, or whatever other adapt mechanic you choose. But the problem there, of course, is that's still not really much better than you'd expect for 5 mana. You could play a vanilla 3 mana 3/4 and 2 Argent Squires for 5 mana. So, this card is probably in line with vanilla expectations, which means it's not good enough to be played. I think it has to exceed expectations for it to really work. Now, there are some other Silver Hand Recruit summoning cards. There's the 5 mana one whose name escapes me. Clearly, as you escalate the number of Silver Hand Recruits you can instantly summon, this gets better, but those kinds of plays cost a lot of mana and come very late in the game. And even 5 Silver Hand Recruits that have been adapted just aren't going to make that big of an impact on the board, right? So, there's probably a combo where you summon 5, somehow they all magically survive, you give them all +3 attack, and you kill your opponent. That's really fun, right? That's a 20 damage 2-turn, 2-card combo, but that's not competitively viable as far as I can tell. So outside of additional cards that we're going to see in Unguro, or some sort of additional mechanic that makes Silver Hand Recruits a lot better and helps synergize with this card, I just don't see Lightfused Stegodon making a lot of sense from a value or efficiency or tempo standpoint. So I think this card is pretty weak, and I don't think it will be played very much at all. That said, let's move on to the next card. This is a neutral minion, the Thunder Lizard. It's a 3 mana 3/3 beast, and it has a battle cry. If you played an elemental last turn, then you get to adapt. And this is a card I don't really think this one's going to be played much, right? This plays off of elemental decks. We've seen a lot of elemental synergy cards, and most of them have had much, much stronger effects than this. A 3-mana 3/3 that adapts is really maybe at best a 4-cost minion, but it's conditionally so. You know, a 3/3 with Divine Shield would be 4 mana. That's a card we've seen and known in the past. But it's just not good enough, because sometimes you won't have the elemental when you need it. Even then, again, it's just not a card that's going to make a significant instant impact on the board. It's sort of just a barely above statted or barely above cost vanilla style minion. So I just think this is sort of a throwaway fodder type card. They just wanted to mix a couple keywords together and create something for people to play around with and maybe occasionally toss into a deck. But ultimately, I don't think this was a card Blizzard even expects to be played a ton. And unless there's some deck that happens to fit all these keywords together really perfectly and play off of beast synergies somehow, elemental beast adapt deck, whatever that might be, unless that perfect storm of decks exists, I think Thunder Lizard will be pretty quickly forgotten. So let's move on to the third and final minion in this review. This is the Terrorscale Stalker. Another 3-mana 3/3, but this time it's a hunter-specific card. And it has an interesting battle cry, trigger a friendly minion's death rattle. So that's something we've seen in the past with Princess Huhuran, a card that really has never seen much play outside of like the first week after it was released and tested a bunch. And it was just discovered to be a little bit too slow and non-impactful on the board. That problem, I think, is, though, mitigated a little bit by the much lower cost of this card. Terrorscale Stalker is a couple mana cheaper, which means you can get him out earlier. And activating death rattle effects, cheap death rattle effects, earlier in the game means they're just going to have a proportionally larger impact on the state of the board at that point in the game. In other words, by the time turn 5, turn 6, turn 7 rolls around, when you might have expected to play a Huhuran on something like a Savannah Highmane, the game is already much more advanced, and the board states are much more advanced, and your opponent has better kinds of removal and better sorts of minions to trade in, and often opportunities to kill you if you've been playing pretty slow and pretty passively reliant on slower death rattle effects. With Terrorscale Stalker, this is a much faster onto the board type minion. You're not expecting a really big, powerful turn 5 or turn 6 kind of effect. So I think this one actually will work considerably better than Huhuran. I mean, for instance, you can imagine Kindly Grandmother, right, on turn 2. That's a little 1/1 that summons a 3/2 when it dies, and suddenly Terrorscale Stalker, if you activate Kindly Grandmother's Death Rattle effect, you're getting a 3/3 and a 3/2 simultaneously, so 6/5 in total stats on turn 3 for 3 mana is a pretty efficient play. And we've seen some other Hunter Death Rattle cards already. The Raptor Hatchling, I think, is the official name of it. The 1-mana 2/1 Death Rattle. Another one you can just sort of passively activate, and although it's not going to be instant on the board, can still give you some return value. I mean, I think you can think of this card in a lot of ways sort of like Unearthed Raptor, which has been a relatively successful card for Rogue. But this one, instead of passively adding that Death Rattle to its own card, its own minion, this one does it instantly, so you can see how it could be advantageous, even more so than Unearthed Raptor. Of course, it's losing a little bit as far as stats are concerned, and maybe reducing friction a little bit compared to Unearthed Raptor. That creates some frustrating moments for your opponents. That's a very difficult thing to say. So this one might not be quite as frustrating or difficult to play around, but more instant in its value. So I think I kind of like this card. It's going to require a deck with consistent early game Death Rattle minions. I'm not sure yet that that's a thing. If you play this and you don't have a Death Rattle, this is a pretty bad minion. It's not a beast, so it doesn't activate any beast synergies. It's really, really just a vanilla 3-mana 3/3, which is not something you like to see in Hunter. So it's going to require the right kind of environment to make this work. But if that deck and if that environment does in fact exist in Journey to Un'Goro, then I think Terrorscale Stalker is in fact a playable card. In fact, even quite good, maybe. So I'm excited to see what happens with this fella. And that'll wrap it up for this review. That was Lightfused Stegodon, an okay card that won't be played. Thunder Lizard, I think, is a below average card that won't be played. And Terrorscale Stalker is an intriguing card they could in fact see some play. So if you guys have any thoughts, comments, or questions on these cards, you know I'd love to hear them. Share your take in the comments below. Are they good? Are they bad? Did I get it wrong? Did I get it right? I'd love to read it all. But until then, thanks so much for watching. And until next time, game on.